Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore events. I am Elisabeth from Gibson's Bookstore, the events coordinator, and I am joined tonight by two authors in celebration of one author's launch day for her new book, Back in a Spell, welcoming Lana Harper.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
She is joined in conversation with her friend, fellow author, Jilly Gagnon. Jilly is also an author, but not of rom-coms. And you have a new one coming up. We'll talk about your new one coming up later. But if you have not read her books, Jilly is the author of All Dressed Up, and Scenes of the Crime is coming later. She's going to tell us all about it. But we are here tonight to gush about Lana Harper and Back in a Spell. If you are new to me and my fervent excitement about, I don't do things by halves. I do things with full enthusiasm. I fell in love with Payback's a Witch when it was first coming out. I wrote my staff pick review in the form of a recipe. And then I just fell absolutely in love with it. I still staff pick it. I love to put it as blind date with a book because it's very hard for people to avoid John Tucker Must Die, but with witches. So I've always loved that one. That was Payback's a Witch. Then Lana put out From Bad to Cursed in the same town. And today we are back with Back in a Spell, which thus far is actually my favorite one, which is hard for me to say after Payback's a Witch because I loved it so much. But it turns out that when Lana writes a character who is essentially me, but hasn't quite been to as much therapy, I relate to it very much because the main character, I believe I messaged Lana like, oh, she's such a Virgo. I expect to see her alphabetizing her spice rack. And she's like, how did you know she is? Lana, that's because I alphabetized my spice rack. I was so excited for this book. I love this book so much. I could gush about it, but you're not here to see me gush about this book. We are here to hear Lana and Jilly gush about this book. Lana, let's jump into this. Before we start, we do have signed book plates from Lana. If you would like a copy of Back in a Spell and would like a signed book plate, you please do order them from Gibson's. Links will be in the sidebar. If you'd like to chat with your fellow audience members, please do. It's in the chat sidebar. And if you have questions for us to ask later in the event, please put them in there. We will be pulling from that when we're asking questions. Lana, congratulations on launch day for Back in a Spell.
Thank you so much.
We're going to try and keep this major spoilers free, but in case we have some new readers who are joining us, Thistle Grove, the setting is almost a character in itself. Can you give us a quick tour, quick history of Thistle Grove to set the scene for possibly new readers, and then give us an elevator pitch for Back in a Spell?
Okay, so Thistle Grove is the reason I started writing these books, and it is a magical town in Illinois. It happens to be in Illinois because that is where I now live, so that's why. There was I also wanted a space that wasn't necessarily a New England haunted town because that's something that we've all seen, and this is a little bit of a different vibe. So it was settled by 4 families of witches about 350 years ago, and it's the Blackmores, the Harlows, the Thorns, and the Abramovs. So they created this sort of interesting mix of kind of like a kitsch witch tourist town, which is just the facade and kind of the veneer for a town that is genuinely a haven for witches. So there's a glamour cast out over the town that prevents any of the normies who are the tourists or the regular non-magic residents from remembering any of the spells that they've seen. But there's all kinds of shenanigans because you have 4 families of witches. There's like 500 of them who are celebrating holidays, getting into magical mayhem, doing spicy witch shit all the time, and trying to keep it under wraps. And then in this latest book, the first book, which Elisabeth also mentioned, was sort of the John Tucker Must Die. But what if 2 of the witches in the Revenge Coven fell in love? This one is more of an awkward first date kind of second chance romance, and it's between one of the more powerful witches in town, Nynaeve Blackmore, who's from the Blackmore family, elitist, scummy, like overly wealthy and just generally obnoxious family. She herself is very sensible and down to earth. And she ends up she's been ditched at the altar like a year previously and has been trying to kind of put her life back together. So she, on a dare from her best friend, goes on an app date with someone that she thinks is going to be absolutely wrong for her, but that's kind of the point, to be spontaneous. So she winds up on a date with Morty Gutierrez, who is the owner of the Shamrock Cauldron, and is very spontaneous, very offbeat, just generally nothing, that Nina would normally kind of go for in her regular life. But then it turns out that they have this unexpected magical bond, and Nina's magic spirals out of control. Morty develops magic. What happens? How is this all tied to Thistle Grove's magical lake? They have to get to the bottom of it and also kind of explore the witch bond, where they're suddenly like, it's as if, as Elisabeth very evocatively puts it, they blackout eloped in Vegas and now they're witch married. And how did it happen? And what are they going to do?
Thank you for all of this. I guess I'm just going to dive in now.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm glad we talked about the witch bond actually last, because the thing that I also love this book the most of your books, and I love all of your books. They're fabulous, and your writing is always beautiful and next level. But Nina has got so much of an amazing, like, spicy is such a good word for like her edge. She's not immediately like your rom-com heroine. She would not be your Hallmark Channel cast heroine in your Christmas comedies, much as I love them, and nor would Morty. But this book is also super spicy on like a sexiness level. And I feel like the most impressive part of all, like, I don't know how you up the level of spiciness in general, but you did it while somehow making like a witch version of married sex, like the hottest sex that exists in the world. And it makes me wish that I were accidentally a Vegas eloping to witches and woke up and like, oh my God, here we go. Best sex in your life forever. So please to tell me how you came up with this sort of sexual feedback loop that makes your sex scenes like level up for the characters and also for me, a lady reading it steamily in her bedroom.
And also me. Yeah, no, well, so you didn't really ask this question, but the reason that it's been progressing with each book is that I was initially kind of tiptoeing into open door sex scenes because I started out in YA and I just couldn't quite tell like what was allowed, what wasn't. And the answer is like, it's all allowed. It's up to you. You can go as far as you want. And there's this, we've been talking up until this book about the witch bond. We knew it happened. We know that it gives whichever, the outsider of the family magical powers if they happen to be a normie. And then even if they don't, anyone who's witch bound ends up kind of empathically bound with their partner. And so we see like how that emotionally affects characters over the past couple of books. And I think we mostly see it with the elders of the families. So they're like the parents of the main characters. It's like not intrinsically sexy, like that wasn't top of mind. And then for this book, I was thinking, okay, so they're witch bound. What is that going to mean? How is that going to translate to their sexual chemistry? Because these are strangers. I mean, they don't know each other. They have this terrible first date. And now they're suddenly stuck in the situation where they can feel each other in this incredibly intimate way that is normally not accessible to anyone. And it's sort of like the best of both worlds, because you have that very sharp kind of not sustainable thrill that happens in the beginning of relationships where it's like feral, you just like gotta have the other person, like their face is on your face. But then at the same time, like you don't know the kinds of things that they like, you don't know what makes them tick. Whereas this is, if you could combine that with someone that you've known for decades, you know everything about them, you know how they like to be touched, you know everything about what makes them happiest, what makes them feel sexiest, and how interesting it would be if you could have those two things together and then also have like just a very literal sensory feedback loop where you could feel anything they felt. And it just doubled and created this weird inception moment where I was like, I can't really imagine how this would be, but I feel like it would be really hot because I've always wanted to know, like,
you can imagine how it could be because you did. Like sexual inception is exactly what it is. You're like, oh my God. And then they're sexting again. And then it's sexting again inside the sexting.
was like a sex turducken. Yeah. No.
Pie caken, actually, because
Exactly. I feel like you're right. Pie caken is a lot sexier than turducken. I take it back. But that's what I was going for. And I'm glad that it came across because those were really fun scenes. I had never written scenes like that. And I had never quite pushed it so far either. So I was like, ooh, we're getting into erotica, but it's like really emotional, feelsy erotica. And also like now we have to think about what both of them are feeling. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. So
it was a lot of fun to read as well. It made me not even tired in my current state. I was like, oh my goodness.
Elizabeth is like, Steam level
right
5. I'm so flattered.
Sexual turducken on a pillow sounds like a wonderful idea. That's what cross stitch is made for. So flip side of the coin, not as sexy. Consent is a huge issue for romance writers and like in romance in general. And you need to consider that, especially in a book where they're functionally strangers to one another. But one of the things that I thought was super interesting about this book and really deepened it for me was that a lot of the consent issues are less about their sexual partnership, because this feedback loop allows them to understand each other intrinsically. And then they ask for consent anyway. But it's about magic and how it plays out in this world, how it relates to this story and its characters. So I want to know how that sort of informed both this story and like your writing as a romance writer, because as both like a human and people who write sex, that's a big important issue. It's a big elephant in the room. So it's a wonderful question, because you already covered the fact that there's like built-in consent happening between the two of them during the sex scenes, but even there's sort of like the double check that happens often. But a lot of what happens to Nina in this book happens against her will, without her agreement. And I really liked when my editor referred to this as Nina's possible villain origin story, because she could have very easily gone that way with what happened to her, where she's already a Blackmore. They're the most powerful of the families. She herself might be very kind of sensible and straight-laced and down to earth, but she's bound within these like toxic intergenerational kind of chains of duty and obligation to her family. And suddenly she gets this magical surge and she has to figure out what to do with it. She didn't ask for it, she didn't want it, but now she has it. It feels good, it feels empowering, it feels really intense. And it reminded me of the fact that a lot of the things that impact us the most in life are things that happen to us without our consent. Like we don't ask for a lot of the things that mold us into who we are. We don't ask for our families. We don't ask for like most of the catastrophes or like the biggest blessings and things that happen to us. So it sort of made me think about how things that happen to us, you know, without our agency can sometimes provoke the most agency that we show, because you have to really like, once you're kind of nose to the grindstone, like you're in this hardest spot that you're ever going to be, whatever is causing it, you have to really figure out what is the most important to you, especially if whatever has been given to you, as in Nina's case, is like, it's intoxicating, it's powerful, it feeds into everything she's been taught by her family that she doesn't necessarily believe. And so it's like one of the biggest tests that she could possibly face. It's like, it's a little bit of a cheat, because it's like the easiest way that as a writer, you can throw your character into really deep water, like literally, because you know, that happens to Nina. She gets in some very deep waters, and you have to see like, what are you made of? What are you going to choose? Why are you going to choose this? What's going to happen? And am I, as a reader, going to agree with you? So it's interesting, because I think that happens a lot to people in real life. Like, as we all know, the past couple of years have all happened to us without our consent, but like, that doesn't matter. You know, no one asks you, it just happens. And then you have to figure out where you're going to go from there and who you're going to be because of it. They asked me, and I'm actually like, I just said yes. And for like, you were like, yeah, might be interesting. I'm pretty bored. I do remember once actually someone reminded me of this. There used to be way back in the day on OkCupid. It was like, I'm sorry, my camera is doing that thing again. Can you see me? You're like a blurry lady. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why my Wi-Fi does this. It's supposed to be my fancy, new, expensive Wi-Fi. Hopefully it'll clear up. And if not, I'll log out and log back in. But there was a question on OkCupid that was essentially like, well, in a certain light, nuclear war would be interesting, right? And it was, yeah, I remember that one. In a certain light, yes. Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, Interesting. I think there's an old curse. I think it's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway,
Right.
so that actually leads me to another question, because you're talking about like the things that happen to you, and family is one of them. And in this book, like obviously the relationship between Nina and Morty is the primary relationship as like a romance novel, and it's super steamy. But you also really dive into relationships outside of that, like friendship, and the family relationships, especially Nina's family relationships. But we also see Morty's as like a wonderful counterpart. And there's a lot of toxicity there, which isn't surprising. Like you've set up the Blackmore family as sort of like there's no surprise that Nina's might become the evil villain origin story. Her family has all of this toxic history, and like we get to see a lot more about it. I want to know what made you want to dig into that sort of darker side of a character and darker side of relationships in this romance.
I, in general, love complicated relationship stories, especially when they happen to be between mothers and daughters. I don't know why that is specifically. I don't have an evil mom, but I love
Lydia's love.
Yeah, but I love the idea of what would happen if the person who's your closest person was this overbearing, toxic, possessive, difficult individual where you had to fall in line and be a certain person. And part of it, as much as my family is not the Blackmores, but a lot of us have families where sometimes love resembles oppression to a strong degree, and becoming your own adult and the setting of boundaries is this extremely difficult process. And so this book, much like the other ones, all have a theme. Like Payback was the book of homecoming, and Cursed was the book of anxiety, and this one was the book of trauma. So Nina has all the stuff that she's lugging around, like her relationship with Sydney and all the damage that left her with, and then her relationship with her family, and this feeling that she just cannot figure out where her own boundaries are and who she even is and who she wants to be. A lot of that was a version of how I was feeling when I wrote it. And that's the lovely and terrible thing about getting to write these books, is that you can just treat them as your therapy sessions and kind of transmute or alchemically alter whatever it is that you're going through into something that hopefully will be helpful to you and interesting to other people. But a lot of that trauma was something that was happening to me at the time, and I needed an outlet that wasn't necessarily like a one-to-one kind of parallel to what I was going through, but that helped me get a handle on, how do you deal with these things? How do you make them into something hopeful? How do you survive and feel like you're going to be a better person afterwards? So this one was, I would say this is the most personal of the 3 books so far. It's the only one that I've cried while writing it. So it makes me very happy to hear that people responded to it, because Nina can be harsh and very rigid, very self-controlled. What I hate using unlikable, that, but she's not necessarily as frequently relatable as a lot of the characters, or so I thought until I started reading reviews. And it seems like a lot of people do resonate with her, which makes me very happy, because it feels like that whole stigma of like, oh, women have to be portrayed a certain way in literature is hopefully eroding a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Nina is absolutely not a stereotypically likable character. She's no manic pixie dream girl,
right.
She makes some decisions throughout, both like just in her general makeup, like how she approaches life, but also like specific to the book, which no spoilers, but like she makes bad decisions. She's flawed and she's real. Which, as a writer, do you wind up sympathizing with the decisions she's making, or are you like, oh, why'd you do that? Like, are you screaming at the TV, but you're also the TV and you're incepting yourself then? And
I feel that I have to understand why she's doing it. It can't be a situation where she's making a decision and I'm like, no, you idiot. It's so obviously ridiculous. I would never. Like, it has to be a decision where, even if it's hopefully something that I think I wouldn't do, I can see why someone would be driven to those extremes. So I think even though technically I was just saying that I considered her less relatable than some of my other main characters, I do still try to make her reasoning and her position clear enough to make it approachable, at least, if not relatable, by someone reading, where it's like, okay, I can see why you feel so backed into a corner. I can understand all of the reasons and the justifications that led you here, even though I hopefully would not have done this way. I didn't want her to feel like a villain. I wanted all of that to kind of dovetail into this kind of explanation of this person is complex. She comes from a very difficult background and very pampered background in some ways, and it's yielded this individual who sometimes reacts in ways that perhaps the rest of us wouldn't.
Well, and I think what I find so interesting and wonderful about Nina is that she's not, the ways in which she's not relatable are very clear and surface level, right? Like she has this incredible privilege. She is a magical being. She is also like rigid and things, as you said, like she has all of that stuff, but she's in a ton of very real pain, and that sense of like dislocation that comes with her pain, because it sort of upends her idea of who she is. A lot of like these outside things that have happened to her are very disorienting, I think, and like make her question a lot about herself. I think that is extremely relatable about her. Like, you know, do I have the ability to turn into some sort of like incredibly magical being and like rain fire and ice upon everyone? No. But would I like it at times? Or am I hurt? Yes, I get that feeling. I think I don't know. I feel like for me, as an unlikable person in real life.
Oh wow, I strongly object to that. As we
unlikable as a literary character, as an unlikable literary character in real life, I would that way. And if somebody who writes people constantly, you know this, where I'm like, but they're interesting. Isn't that enough? Nina is my favorite, and the pairing between Nina and Morty I think the reason that this is my favorite of your books, and they're all awesome, is because I think Nina and Morty, they're sort of, I would not even call it chemistry. It's like an alchemy between them. They're like different chemical elements playing off of each other. And it not only brings like a lot of steam, it makes it, there's a ton of depth that comes in through these people in this book. And maybe because you said you're writing through trauma, you're writing a different level of stuff. So I'm going to say all of that stuff, how deep you are, and then ask you a super shallow question, which is like, they're my favorite. Who's your favorite? Who's your favorite of your characters or your love setups?
I did love the two of them together. I love them so much more than I thought I would. I was nervous at the beginning that I wasn't going to find the way in, because it wasn't quite as obvious to me as the first two books were, and then they ended up being so lovely together. It's tricky to say because I have this enduring fondness for Talia and Emmy that I think will never go away. I think because Talia is my dream girl, and so I'm just never going to let go of that. And then in terms of main character, Issa was the easiest to write. So Nina felt like the most painful and the deepest, but Issa felt like the sort of, it was just a pleasure, and it was really not when I was writing about painful stuff there, it was things that I understood and had already worked through, and I just wanted to have it on the page, and I wanted to have that representation, but I wasn't necessarily working through it in the moment. So it was just pleasant. Like, it was just very familiar and lovely. But in terms of couples, like in terms of I guess the overall dynamic, I think Morty and Nina are probably the most fun, and largely because of the witch bond, because that was so great. I also really great.
So okay, Issa's the easiest to write. Is Nina the hardest to write?
Actually, no, Emmy was the hardest to write.
Okay.
The hardest to write because I was making that transition from YA to adult, and I didn't have as clear of a sense of her as I did of the other two. I feel now that I actually understand Emmy better now, having had 3 books of her sort of being a side character in the plots, but I don't think that I had she was so much more of a stand-in for people who hadn't been to Thistle Grove before, for me, for, my first time visit there, that it wasn't like her full dimensions weren't as clear to me as the other two were. It was just that Nina was more painful to write. It was easier in a sense. It was just that it was more difficult and ultimately more rewarding to write her than it was to write Emmy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think characters who are super complex can be hard to write on an emotional level, but easy to write because you always have like another layer to mine on some level where it's like, oh, what's going on here. Totally different side of things. You write amazing characters, and I could talk about all of them all day, but you also write really awesome magic. And I'd like to talk about your magics, especially the way you describe spells feels like super intuitive somehow. I'm like, oh, of course, this is how this works. This is both how the spell works and how one would cast this spell clearly. And also I have absolutely no idea how I would ever write a spell. I'd be like, then they magic. I would love to know. Guys, don't expect me to write the next Thistle Grove book, everybody. That is not my strong suit. I would like to know, A, where you get your inspiration, and then I'll give you B once you tell me about that.
Hard to say. The spells are just things that I want to see happen. I have no idea where they really come from. I've been obsessed with magic since I was little, especially occult magic. And then as I got older, I sort of like dabbled like in the craft to the degree that you can. And I was a member of a real coven for a while, and I got to see some cool stuff, but like all the things that you ever do as kind of a practicing Wiccan are never these like big sort of Disney-esque, displays of magic. And anytime I thought of a spell, I was like, what would this look like brought to kind of like the nth degree? Like, what is the most interesting and largest scale and flashiest version of something I can imagine? And then I would just sit, I'm trying to think of whether I have any specific, there's never a specific inspiration for it, but I've read a lot of beautiful magic and witch books, like Naomi Novik's books, especially. Yeah, like hers, that's like some next level stuff where I don't understand how she does it, where it's just like building blocks, where it's almost like it is like chemistry or alchemy or something. She really understands the way that her magical systems work. And I used to do that in earlier books, and in this book I was just like, I just want it to be flashy, and I want it to be cool, and I want to feel like I would really enjoy watching this as like a Cirque du Soleil show. So a lot of it,
you want to see, which is like the show you'd go to.
Oh man, I feel like it would be a really close toss up between like Avramov's. I love necromantic magic. I just find it so sexy and weird. Like I think it's there's something about it that's very enticing, probably because it's like taboo and you're not, supposed to be into all the deathly stuff. But then Blackmoor magic, like Camelot is my not so secret favorite destination. That's where I would go. I would actually go there first before I went to the Avramov haunted house. So I think if I were picking something to see, I would probably pick some ridiculous like elementalist magic display, and maybe even something fun like Nina's glamour that she accidentally like overpowers intensely. I would love to see that. Just like, what would that be like? It would be like living Lenza, like you would do like a living Instagram app. It would be fun. Or there's a scene where she does essentially, it looks like fireworks spells. She's just like getting it out of her system because for reasons she might not be doing that anymore. So I remember thinking how beautiful that would be and how much I would love to see something like that. And really also anything, like if I could have my combination pick, I would have spells cast by Lady's Lake and have that happen at the same time, because that's always, I love writing about Lady's Lake. I'm doing it all the time. I find reasons in every book to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like, why would you not? It's I no spoilers. I love Ladies Lake in this book, especially. It's really wonderful, and I would probably brave going through the cold to experience it.
Even I would. And I mean, Nina and I are like 100% aligned on this. No winter, no to winter, 0 to winter. I don't want to be on a mountaintop in winter. I don't like it.
I'm a hardy winter person. You are like a fragile, delicate flower. We're not meant to exist in this cold climate. I'm from Minnesota, everybody. So like, it's a point of pride that I have to be a hardy winter person, because otherwise I failed my upbringing in some fundamental way. Really interested that you wrote a Blackmoor story at all, because I feel like that is like a challenge that is tough, like that you've set yourself. You kind of gave yourself this hurdle to get over by making our like John Tucker Must Die is the evil Blackmoor a-hole. And you've consistently characterized them as sort of like the take advantage of everybody in this town. They're very elitist. They're very selfish. And I was wondering what like made you want to write them. Did you want to do, are you just into redemption arcs? Do you think that they deserved it? Or is there more to mine there because they have all of this layover? Just tell me about Tell me about why you wanted to write them.
It's both those things. I am a sucker for redemption arcs when they're hard won, like really earned. And I think in this case, Nina's in the situation of being in this family. Again, consent. She didn't choose to be born as a Blackmore. There are a lot of ways in which she's not a traditional Blackmore. We even see Gareth, who we know is like a ridiculous fuckboy, and he's had all these advantages and all of these just worse character traits kind of almost encouraged in him as he matured. But in her case, she was sort of the stabler younger sister. She didn't get a lot of that weird, like pampered scion treatment growing up. So through her, we get a lens into, yes, these people suck. Why do they suck? Is it just because they're overly wealthy and they've been given this position of power? Is there other stuff going on there? I think a lot of times that complexity to difficult families is interesting for me. Like, I know you and I both love Succession for this reason. It's like, why are terrible people terrible?
Yeah.
What, can they be
Go into
terrible and vulnerable at the same time? Can they be appealing? Do you want to understand them even as you acknowledge that there's like a certain inherent terribleness happening there? But in her case, I didn't necessarily I didn't want her to be like, she wasn't going to be a villainess. I didn't want that for her. She's an outlier for her family, and she's in a sense the way forward for her family. Like, there's these generational patterns that she's trying to break, even though they've benefited her family this entire time. And I wanted to see what it would be like to write a vulnerable Blackmore story, like not from someone's perspective who had been given everything and had just like done the absolute worst with it. And it was really interesting, and I was very surprised by how much I loved her by the end of it, because I also I set myself up to hate them. Like, I'd been writing Blackmore, whatever the opposite of fan fiction stories is, hate fiction stories for them for 2 books. And it was really shockingly easy to imagine what it would look like inside that kind of cloistered, weird tower of wealth, where in fact they were doing terrible things to their kids and just weren't creating any kind of environment for any sort of positivity. So hopefully that Nina shows a little bit of the other end of things.
No, I think she absolutely does. I think that having the Blackmores be center stage. Also, yeah, douche canoe fuckboy is my by the way, so reading from the comments, that's what I'm performing under from here on out. And I lost entirely everything I was going to say because I have baby brain. So let's just talk about douche canoe fuckboy is an excellent term, and then I'll just move on from there.
I was like, oh yes, asshat playboy. Yeah, we were constantly skirting that line too, because I was calling him fuckboy in all of our internal correspondence, and then I was like, can I say that? But then I was like, oh, I'm writing adult now. I feel like I can say that because there's fine.
We just said it in conversation.
Yeah, several times.
The FCC is not watching. We can say whatever we want. So you get to discover all of this stuff about the Blackmores. We also, in this book, no big spoilers, but you get to discover a ton about Thistle Grove and the source of its magic and what's going on behind the scenes. Did you always know this? Is this something that you uncovered during this book specifically? I would love to know, the same way that I'm fascinated by how you write spells, people who can fantasy and world build in that way. I'm always interested in how the world building happens for them. If it's all at the beginning, or if it's something that they keep mining as they go.
I wondered this myself, because I had initially sworn to myself that I was going to keep this magic vague, and it wasn't going to be this sort of elaborate world, because I wanted to keep it a little bit lighter than it ultimately became. But then I was like, why did you name it Lady's Lake? You clearly knew something was going to happen that had to do with a lady, and there was going to be a certain kind of magic that was at play here. So I think there are some magical archetypes that are just so deeply rooted in my psyche. I don't know why. I love writing about them so much, and I can't talk about them specifically because of spoilers, but we do find out what the source of the magic is in this book. And I think it was an organic process in the sense that I had a suspicion in the beginning of what I wanted it to be, but I was leaving it open-ended. And then the closer I got to this book, the more convinced I became that I knew what it was that was happening in the lake. which is weird, right? Because I'm making the story. Like it shouldn't be surprising. Like either I know or I don't, but it was one of those aspects of writing this that was genuinely a process of discovery for me, which is my favorite part of this. Like on the one hand, it's terrifying because it's so reassuring and safe if you know where you're going. But on the other, it's really exciting when it turns out your brain knows what happened before you know what happened. And so I loved that once I got to this, I was like, oh, okay, I did know what was going on in the lake. And I know even more about how the town was founded, and that a lot more of that happens in the next book too. So I had a lot of that background stuff kind of percolating wherever it is that we think about our like sort of back burner ideas while I was writing this book. But it was very enjoyable to sort of get to do that and discover that I had known more about it than I thought.
No, I'm so fascinated. I mean, like, you know me, like my writing process is like, I would like to deep dive into everyone's parents' background before I start writing a story. Just like, it's a really good way, by the way, if anybody watching is a writer, to be like, I am extremely effective and doing things that matter to my job. However, I have not written a single word of meaningful prose. I have written about like, and then once in kindergarten, she wet her pants when the ferret came and everyone had to not see the ferret. And it was the worst day in the kindergarten class and it's really formed her as a person. Like, will this ferret story come in? No.
I think it's like, I wish I could do this. I am envious. I really do. I think it's such a powerful way, and I can't quite make myself do it. Like, I try, and I've been getting a little bit better with each book because I'm like, okay, a character sheet. Yes. I know something about these people, which I never used to do, and I only do it now because of Jilly, because I was like, oh, okay, this is smart. Yes. I need to know more about them before I start.
I'm really touched that some of my OCD is like rubbed off.
So much of it. I really think that that's why Nina became more complex, is because I'd been watching you do this for years. And I was like, what if I actually understood this person a little bit before I started writing? Could that be something positive?
I mean, but then the funny part is like, I'll go back to my character sheets and I'm like, you thought that about this person?
Yeah, then you change it. Yeah.
You were extremely wrong. Like you go through and you're like, oh, I know everything about like their star sign and their eye color and this most important memory and like what kind of cheese spread that they'll pick on this cheese board I created. Like, I know it all. And then you get in and it's like, they are lactose intolerant. Oh no, what did I do? I don't know what I created.
Undid it all. That does happen. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I now come up with beforehand, I don't end up using, but I still think, I think it's like grist for the mill. Like it helps you get there.
Speaking of like craft, what parts of the book do you like the book, any book, what parts of books do you find like the easiest to write, the hardest to write? Like are openings the easiest or the most exciting at least? Or I find the middle, I call it like the thick, sludgy, horrible middle. Like I'm always like, why did I ever consider writing any book ever? Because it has this part in the middle that exists and I have to get through. So like, tell me, what parts do you like and hate?
The middle is the dead zone. It's like who paid me to do this? Why would they have done that? That's terrible. I should give them their money back.
I have committed fraud.
I'm like, I'm just a scam artist. Yeah, I love the first couple of chapters, but especially the first chapter is so exciting for me. And first sentences especially. I don't know how this happens, and I hope it never stops happening. I usually have the first sentence months before I start writing, and it typically doesn't even change.
You ass.
I have only changed the first sentence of a book once in all of the books that I've written. I don't know how this works. It's like some weird magical talisman, and I don't question it because it's the one thing that I'm like, okay, this sentence, I got it. This is the book. It's like, it's my doorway into the book. This is how we're going to get there. Everything else can change. The whole first chapter can change, but the first sentence, it's going to stay the same like 98% of the time. And I hate you so much.
I hate you so much.
You know what you're writing before you start. I hate you.
Okay, fine. Let's end this in mutual envy.
Loathing.
This is how we ended our friendship because of that. All right, we have to go to audience questions soon. So I have one question. What restaurant is the best restaurant to eat at in Thistle Grove?
I got it.
So many good ones. Or bar.
Okay, just personally, I got to go to the Avalon. I'm such a Blackmore slut. Like, what's wrong with me? I just have to eat there because I love themed vaguely pretentious, classy restaurants. Like if you take me to Disneyland and you take me to one of those like weird, like
the one inside Pirates of the Caribbean.
yeah, that's what I need. So I was like, yes. Oh, so it's in an island on inside the moats, and they have 3-course meals, and they're named things like Guinevere's Surf and Turf. I will eat there. I will be so happy. So that's my number one, and then Shamrock Cauldron obviously is number 2. And
What
if
is in Guinevere's Surf and Turf? What is the surf and what is the turf?
oh, just your standard. It's your
Okay.
standard beef and lobster. Nothing special about it. It's just called Guinevere's Surf and Turf, which is all I need. I need it to be called something fancy.
I was hoping it was made out of like, I don't know, the soles at the bottom of some.
Nah,
I don't know.
no.
Something cool.
No, it's like Outback Steakhouse, but it's in the middle of a moat. Yeah, it's
It's
fine.
made of blooming onions shaped into spikes.
Exactly. I'm so happy. Yeah.
Would eat that. Okay. I think that's enough for me.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned the food, Lana, because I've noticed that in your books, you describe the food a lot.
A lot.
A lot. Like you describe the flavors, you describe the feelings that they evoke. I get hungry reading your books. I was rereading the book tonight to be like, oh, I need to like refresh. It's been a couple months. I got all the way up to the first spicy scene and I'm like, yes, we're good. We're still good. But Nina was at her best friend's house eating pigs in a blanket with caramelized onions and Gruyere cheese. And I'm like, what is happening? What is this? Is that something you've really eaten?
Yes.
Like a dream that
we've actually, I think Jilly ate it too, or Jilly was at least there when this happened. One of our mutual friends made these. Claire made these once.
Oh my God.
Yeah. She made.
I like on my shit and not eating beef or something, and I missed out on this glory.
I think so. I think it might have been that, but I know you were there because we were all there together. And she was like, "Ta-da! Gourmet pigs and blankets," and I was like, "What? It can't possibly be better than the kind I buy in like a tube or whatever." Yeah, it was ridiculous. It was those things together, and it was fantastic. I didn't make that up. It exists in the real world. Claire Schultz makes it.
So,
it was. She says it was me.
But Schultz makes it, most everything she makes is excellent. So like unsurprising that this was the source of this food. Let's be clear. Like,
so idea for you for the 4th book, which we'll talk about. I'm
just trying to get.
Yeah. Okay. My idea for you for your 4th book pre-order campaign incentive is a recipe booklet of the cocktails that you've described and basically all the things that everybody eats because it's so good and I need it and I need to know what is in half of Morty's cocktails. Put a pin in that. We're going to discuss that. But I mean, or I feel like, I don't know, I'd chuck $5 towards that. So, I mean, there's your next Kickstarter. Okay. So, we have a couple audience questions, audience members. Yes, cocktails are always my favorite. The things that people come up with for cocktails in books are amazing and I need it in my mouth. I need to taste it. We have audience questions. If you have a question, throw it in the chat sidebar, throw it in the Q&A box. We will get to it. I just want to talk about how so much of this book also was about control and control as an anxiety coping mechanism. I read a fascinating book about anxiety this past year, and it talked about how control is the way that you try and prevent bad things from happening. Because if you can control something and if you can plan for all future eventualities, you might be able to head off a disaster, which may or may not actually be happening, but you've pre-imagined a disaster and you're pre-imagining the horrible things that will happen. So you start controlling everything. And that's Nina's like whole life and whole world, that she's trying to control everything. And not to cast shade upon myself with my alphabetized spice rack. But like it's an anxiety thing. And when she was talking about, she's like, I need it to be like this and I need it to be like that. I was like, I know exactly that tight spiral that was in her chest the whole time. And then she starts talking about what a fancy bitch she is. And she's like, I had an Angora sweater and my boots came up to here. And I'm like, yes, own it.
I had to keep looking that stuff up too. And then Jilly had to correct me sometimes because there was a couple times where she was like, that's not even an expensive thing that you just said. And I was like, oh yeah, fair.
Sorry, Lana, that brand isn't fancy.
Nina has such a wonderful best friend who is a normie. And she talks about like how it hurts that she can't share an aspect of her life with her best friend. And her best friend mentions, she's just like, I know you're my platonic life partner. Like, they're so close. And I love how her friend is like, there's the fancy bitch I knew you were, because she's like, Nina knows what she likes. She's not ashamed. She likes her nice boots. She likes her nice sweater. She likes what she likes, and she's going to go with it. And Nina was just so relatable in that. And it's because so many of the characters are in so many books are so down to earth, which is nice. But sometimes we like a little fancy, and you almost feel bad liking something fancy because it's not in the book. And it's like, I'm sitting here on like my very plush blanket, you know, and I'm next to a fire, and I brought a cheese plate for myself. We're allowed to like nice things. So it was really nice to see that represented in a heroine who was unapologetically hedonistic. Speaking of representation, we're going to switch drastically. Sarah in the audience says, can we talk about the representation? I never read anything when I pick up a book. I just read the first chapter and decided. And when I realized the story was queer, I cried. I was just so happy. All of your books are delightfully queer, and it's not like this is the center part of the story and it is a message book. You know, they're just so casually queer and beautiful. So talk about writing in a very heteronormative publishing industry.
I love that you called it casually queer, because that's exactly how I think about it, in that I don't want, and I never wanted any of these stories to be centerpiece queer angst stories, because there's enough of that in the world already, and it's difficult enough already. And so I just wanted these stories to be, the idea is, you know, this is a world where we're done worrying about, you know, gender and orientation. We're just going to have these stories as they come. And sometimes, you know, it's not, it can't be for everyone. Everyone's pansexual experience isn't the same. Everyone's bi experience isn't the same. Obviously, like in Payback, Emmy and Talia are very different in how they experience their bi identities. And then Morty uses both he and they pronouns, but mostly he pronouns, which I've seen some of my friends do, and I know isn't, well, it's difficult to say the norm because there is no norm. That's sort of the point. Every non-binary person and anyone who identifies as any identity is going to have a completely different experience for the most part than a lot of other people. And so I just want that, I always wanted that to be something that feels safe and accepted without being the focus of any of the conflict of the story. I just wanted that to, you know, it's part and parcel of the package. It's a beautiful thing about whichever character we're talking about, but their real pain, their real trauma is something unrelated to that. And it's because I wanted that. Growing up, I was looking for those books all the time, and I never found any. Like, I can think of maybe 2 bisexual genre books that I found while I was reading, and I was like, oh, maybe people just don't write about that. Like, that's just not something that's out there. So it makes me very happy when I see people responding and really liking the fact that I didn't center those things, that it's a part of a much larger constellation of the humanity that's happening in these stories, that's supposed to be largely happy and largely safe, in a way that, even though, yeah, of course, they're going through difficult things, but we know they're not going to die and nothing terrible is going to happen to them because they're not, you know, hetero cis people. It's just a space where they can be exactly who they're going to be, and they're witches on top of that. So all of those things kind of, this is confluence of perfect world. And that's why I always think of Thistle Grove as the place where I would ideally want to live, which is, I think, probably the vibe that resonates the most with people. Like, Halloween Town, yes. Queer Halloween Town, we can all do this.
I keep seeing, like, we want queer stories that are not centered around trauma. We want stories about joy. We want stories about stories, and just not because, like, you're queer, now have some trauma. And it's like, that, I don't, if I wanted that, I would be reading a different kind of book.
Yeah.
Jamie says, did you have plans for Morty when you introduced them originally in book 1, or did that develop over the books? I remember you and I chatting and you saying, I kind of wrote myself into a corner. I'd wanted them to be fully non-binary, but I or not full, that's not.
Yeah.
But like you wrote yourself into a corner, like you'd already established some pronouns.
Yep. It definitely. So that was, I would have, if I had had the chance to go back, I would have probably used more they pronouns, but because Morty was a very tangent, like a fringe character in the first book, it was they were someone that Emmy knew in high school, but wasn't super, super close with. I didn't have a chance. And then even in book 2 is sort of the same thing. Morty dated Issa's brother for a while. So we had already established that Morty was pansexual, and that was just something that we knew about them, but there wasn't enough room to kind of explore, like, okay, well, is it he, is it they, like what pronouns? And so I tried to kind of clarify, okay, mostly he, they pronouns in certain circumstances, but everything kind of works within the framework that Morty has established, like for themselves in that very specific life, especially because he's also working with an immigrant family where his mom is Irish, his dad is Portuguese. And so part of the tension that Nina identifies with him is that he still puts on a little bit, not of an act necessarily, but emphasizes the masculine when at home, because even though Morty's dad is very understanding, mom necessarily like not as much so. And so this is like another place where they can kind of meet on common ground. But I would have liked, if I had thought, I knew that Morty would be a great love interest, but I had no guarantee that I was going to be writing enough books for that to happen. So it would have been nice to have more flexibility. But since I already had a canon established, I had to work within that framework a little bit.
All right.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. That's really nice. That makes me feel really happy.
Someone asked, how did you do the world building for this series? Did Thistle Grove come first, or did the characters and plot, etc.?
This is a tough one. So the Gauntlet came first, actually, and then after the Gauntlet, I knew there would be 4 families, and there had to be a magical town because the Gauntlet had to be set somewhere. So the first idea for John Tucker Must Die, but everyone is witches, and 2 of them fall in love with each other was the very first idea, and then I went from there to, okay, well, what are the stakes? What is there, how is there a competition, how is there something that they're fighting for where John Tucker gets undermined by them? And Thistle Grove was the second thing that came out of it. So then once I had Thistle Grove, it was a very easy leap to, okay, well, what kind of magic would be there? Who are the families competing? What are their magical talents? And then the rest of it just kind of layered in because I had so much space. You know, book 1, Emmy comes back and she's exploring her town and seeing it with new eyes because she's been gone for almost 10 years. In book 2, we have Issa, who's lived there her whole life. She's very familiar with all the ins and outs of the town. And then I just got to think about, like, what are the most beautiful places? What are the cheesiest attractions I can imagine? Like, what if I could have my personal custom built Salem with all my favorite foods and my favorite fun stuff to do? And it really is like the ultimate wish fulfillment. Like, I built myself like an amusement park town full of people that I would want to live with and stuff that I would want to do forever. So, yeah.
And that's how you ended up with Singing Sunflowers.
Exactly. Yes.
You know,
angsty Maroon 5 singing Sunflowers.
Top 40, you know, just hanging out in the fields with a talking tree. Thermal springs in Illinois. Yeah. All right, we are almost at the end here. Let's ask what is coming up for each of you. Lana, I know that there's a book 4. This is not a trilogy. Surprise. How many?
Surprise. 5.
Okay. All right.
5. I'm going to toss it to Jilly because I've talked so much and we only have a little bit of time, and I would love to hear about what Jilly's, and then if we have time, then we can go back to my 4 and 5.
Sure. So I will just remind our audience members that Back in a Spell and Payback's a Witch and From Bad to Cursed and Jilly's books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. We have signed book plates to include with Back in a Spell. Your 4th one comes out in August. I'll put links in the description. Jilly, tell us about yours coming out in September.
Yeah, my next book is called Scenes of the Crime. And it is another thriller mystery. I don't know exactly where I fall on that. I don't really know where anything falls on that spectrum. But four friends from college are reuniting at the location of a fateful spring break where the sort of nexus of their group, a fifth friend, went missing in college. They want to sort of resolve what happened. And there's reasons to suspect all of them, including our narrator, who happens to be a screenwriter and is telling the story both in real time and also through the screenplay that she's hoping to adapt from this like majorist event of her life, the most, intense story she's ever wanted to solve happened to her, whatever happened to our friend Vanessa. I can't say a whole lot more than that without spoiling myself. So yeah, it's a lot of toxic female friendships and intense drama at a winery.
So good. It's so good.
Okay. Lana, we all love cats. Are there more cats in your fourth? By the way, there's a cat in this book.
So there's actually a raven in the fourth book.
Excellent.
There's a raven familiar. I finally went like full on into familiars and I hadn't done that before. So yes, not as many cats, but there will be a raven.
All right. So tell us about book 4. I've left it for you to tell us. It has a title already.
Yes, it's in Charms Away. It is, I'm calling it Delilah's Book of Rage, because all of them have their nicknames. It's difficult to describe without spoilers, but Delilah has been hit with this she's had a major forgetting incident in between the last book and this one, and she's picking up the pieces. She's no longer in control of her mind the way she used to be, and she's the next successor to the Harlow record-keeping legacy. So she's going to be the next owner of Tomes and Omens. And so she's so frustrated and panicked and terrified by this kind of descent into an unreliable mind that she ends up casting this baneful spell, like a blood spell, to get her memory back, that ends up making her into a beacon for supernatural creatures. So there's a lot more monsters and cryptids in this next one than there were in the past books. And then this monster hunter from Chicago who's half fae shows up and is allegedly willing to help her and is very sexy and roguish, but has ulterior motives. And so Delilah has to decide whether or not to work with her and figure out what is going on with her and what her role is in Thistle Grove and what role the Harlows play in the history of Thistle Grove.
It is extremely good.
Thank you.
Well, let me know when it shows up on Edelweiss so that booksellers can read it, because we're all gonna want to read it. Excuse me while I get this monster out of the way. Go over here. You have treats. Thank you so much for this. This was fun. I had such a great time. I'm so excited that we finally got to do an event. If you ever come out to the East Coast, I am claiming a day for a bookstore event or bowling. I don't know. We're going to do something.
Or both. All of them.
Both. Yes. Thank you so much, everybody who came out for us tonight. Again, if you'd like a copy of Back in a Spell or to pre-order In Charm's Way or Jilly's book as well, we do take pre-orders this early. We would be happy to do that for you. Links are in the description, and you will receive links as well in our follow-up emails. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Lana, Jilly, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Elisabeth. And thank you so much, Jilly, for doing the Q&A with me.
I am so honored that I got to be a part of this amazing book. So thank you so much for letting me do that.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.